Hey guys, Snake Eater here. So today I woke up feeling like the sexiest man in Alaska. I woke up in my favorite Game of Thrones PJs. I put on my best Bob's Burger shirt. I ate a mango popsicle for breakfast. Feeling pretty good. I think today is the day to finally talk about the hood buff. Now, first things first, just get this out of the way. Yes, I did not like the buff. There were a couple things I liked, but there was just way too many things that they changed or just took out that I did not like. If that triggers you and you want to dislike my video, call me an asshole or call me a negative Nelly, a complaining Carl, an ungrateful Ulysses, an overcritical Oliver, a protesting Peter, a whining Willie, or you just straight up want to call me a bitch.
I'll Hitler, bitch! And speak into the mic, bitch! Bitch! Miserable son of a bitch! Bitch! Where's my money, bitch? Bitch, where's my money? Where's my money, bitch? Cue ball, son of a bitch. Son of a bitch. Bitch! Bitch.
Go ahead, man. I don't care. Remember, I'm the sexiest man in Alaska. Anyways, I'm not gonna go into full detail about what I didn't like about the buff, alright? Just straight up, I didn't like basically everything about it. Except the invisibility. I loved that. And yeah, the detonation damage was a lot. It was crazy. But I didn't rank up the hood for damage, alright? I ranked him up to be a utility mystic champ, to manage a bunch of buffs at once, alright? With the new buff, he couldn't do that, alright? That's why I didn't like him. So, the buff is gone, right? They took it away like a month ago. I'm aware I'm really late talking about this. So what's the point of me bitching and complaining about this, alright? Well, I made a Nova buff video. Ideas I would have if I was buffing Nova. Because when they announced the buff for Nova, it was just 3 little changes to his damage. They didn't actually give him anything else to help him in endgame content or give him any extra utility, so I got to thinking, what would I do if I was gonna buff Nova? And then after that, I was like, what if I could buff the hood? And it made it a little easier because I had inspiration, I had ideas from the hood buff and the way he is now, and I just added on top of that. And I also took inspiration from other champs like Man-Thing, Morningstar, Mojo, Ghost, maybe Dormammu. So yeah, these are my ideas and this is what I would do with the hood buff, alright? So, first things first, you no longer have a set amount of charges per quest. I think you started out like 24 charges, 24 hex pistols or whatever with the buff. No longer. That's gone. You start out every fight with Dormammu Demonic Energy, 10 charges every single fight. You manage them, you use them any way you want, alright? You end a 5-hit combo with a medium, you place a curse buff on the opponent. You end a 5-hit combo with a light attack, you place a Dark Dimension spell buff on the hood, alright? So the spell buffs on the hood, they give him a little bit more utility and they benefit the hood. Curse buffs on the opponent, they do negative things towards the opponent, obviously, once you stack them up. They don't do any damage or anything, they just add extra abilities depending on how many you have at the moment. So curse buffs. Curse buffs are placed on the opponent with a max of 10. 2 curses on the opponent. Every curse enhances the potency of debuffs placed on the opponent by 20% each. So with special attacks you can place debuffs on the opponent. Every curse enhances those debuffs by 20% each. 5 curses. All damaging debuffs inflicted on the opponent are refreshed and converted into passive debuffs, so you can't shrug them off or purify them after using a heavy. So you have a bleed on the opponent, you have 5 curses on the opponent, use a heavy, that bleed is converted into a passive bleed. 7 curses. All buffs on the opponent are given plus 40% potency, are given plus 40% duration and negative 80% potency. And you'll see why this is important soon. At 10 curses, the opponent suffers a minus 50% power gain debuff. All sources of power are cut in half, alright? So like with the hardest thing to figure out with the hood is if I'm taking away the hex pistols, I still want to be able to detonate something on the opponent. I want that detonation damage still. So it took me a while to figure out what. I figured maybe you can detonate buffs. Like a Man-Thing can, he puts buffs on the opponent and then use a heavy, and then he turns those buffs into like poison or armor breaks, I think. Kind of like that. So you'll see why that plus 40% duration on buffs is important, because you want those buffs to last longer so you can turn them, so you can detonate them. All right, but I'm getting ahead of myself. All right, spells. These are the buffs that you put on the hood. Spell buffs are placed on the hood with a max of 10. 2 spells. Every spell on the hood grants plus 5 potency to future buffs. 5 spells. Copy the following buffs on the opponent: regeneration, fury, armor, precision, cruelty, and power gain. I took that from Morningstar. I think when she has enough souls, she can also copy buffs that are on the opponent. And then every spell that the hood has, those buffs plus 5 potency with the 2 spell mechanic. 7 spells. Gain 10% of bar power. Woo! Woo, okay. 7 spells. Gain 10% in bar power and 1% health every time the opponent misses. Now, with the hood buff, they had this bug where every time you refresh the nullify on the opponent, you gained regeneration. And when they took that away and announced it was a bug, that was like the last straw. I was like, really? You couldn't just leave that in there? He has like no utility, and this could have gave him a little bit of utility, but nope, they took it away. So I thought, how can we give him a little bit of a regeneration? Like, even though it was a bug, I wanted to keep that in his abilities. And also the ghost gains power every time the opponent misses, right? So I took inspiration from that too. At 10 spells, the hood gains fury buffs, total to the number of active buffs on the opponent, with plus 2% attack rating for each fury buff. Heavy attacks. Refresh all passive damage and non-damaging debuffs on the opponent, except parry. You can't refresh parry. So, if you have a bleed on the opponent, a shock or whatever, heavy attack refreshes it back to its original state. But remember, if you're at 5 curses on the opponent, it gets converted into a passive. Refreshed can convert into a passive. Oh, every refresh updates the debuff damage with the number of active curses. So you remember earlier with the 2 curses, every curse enhances the potency of debuffs placed on the opponent by 20%. So if you put a debuff on the opponent and they only have 2 curses, that's 40% potency, right? And it stays at 40%, even though if you add extra curses, you have to refresh those debuffs in order for it to scale up with how many curses you have. Does that make sense? Okay. Now dash back and hold block for 1 second. You gain invisibility passive. It's not a buff, it can't be unnullified. When it ends, invisibility goes on cooldown for 6 seconds. While active, Hood's attack gains almost 600 critical damage rating and ignore 75% armor and block proficiency. While active, incoming attacks have 120% chance to miss. Each time the opponent misses, it goes down by 20%. That I kept. But I added all non-contact or projectile attacks only decrease that percentage by 5% instead of 20. Critical hits, 100% chance to stagger the opponent lasting 6 seconds. Now staggers, okay, I changed something with the hood. He doesn't nullify buffs anymore. Instead, he converts buffs into dead buffs. All right, let me explain. If you have a stagger or you nullify a buff on the opponent with the hood, it doesn't get nullified anymore. Instead, that buff gets refreshed and converted into a permanent buff with minus 100% ability accuracy. So if the opponent has a regen and you nullify it, it gets turned into a permanent regen but it doesn't regenerate. It's just a dead buff that just sits there. Because you want to detonate buffs. That's where the detonation comes in here in a little bit. So when a staggered opponent gains a buff, the buff is converted into a permanent buff and suffers minus 100% ability accuracy. When the stagger ends, it inflicts 300 direct damage on the opponent and heals the hood for the same amount. Alright, so here we go. Buff detonation. If all 3 damaging debuffs are active and converted into passives, it causes a detonation on the opponent. So you gain these debuffs from Special 1, Special 2, Special 3. They each have their own a debuff. And once you're at like the 2 curses, you can convert those into passives. Once all 3 are at passive, it causes a detonation. And the detonation damage is based on how many buffs are on the opponent at that time. So that's why earlier I added that plus 40% duration, but negative 80 potency, because you want as many buffs on the opponent at one time for a huge detonation. And these also count with your curse buffs you have on the opponent too. So whatever buffs are permanent, that are dead buffs, your curse buffs, or whatever extra buffs the opponent has, you can detonate all of those when you turn these 3 debuffs into passives. Alright, so I'm gonna try to explain the damage. The damage from the debuffs, so the debuffs last for 6.66 seconds. So the damage overall with those 6.66 seconds gives a detonation of 100 extra % for every buff active on the opponent. Now, this took a while to figure out with the math because I'm stupid. Example: all three debuffs are active. Each debuff does 6.66 damage, so that's 1,998 damage. But with the curses, with the plus 20% potency per curse on the opponent, if the opponent had all 10 buffs, all 10 curse buffs, that's plus 200% potency. So over 6.66 seconds, those debuffs are now 5,994 damage. Alright? And if there are 10 curse buffs on the opponent, and just for example, 2 armor ups, 2 regens, and 2 furies, that's 16 buffs total. So it's 5,994 damage plus 1,600% extra damage. So I'm pretty sure I did the math right. So with 16 buffs detonated, that's over 100,000 damage. Now I know with the hood buff there were like 300,000 or 200,000 detonations, but that hood buff was just pure damage and no utility. This is utility and damage, so I had to scale down the detonation by a bit to level out with the utility that's already there. Alright, special attacks. Special 1, Dark Dimension Shock. Every debuff lasts for 6.66 seconds, alright? And they all do 666 damage. Unless they scale up with the potency with how many curse buffs are active on the opponent. Alright, so shock damage over those seconds. When shock expires or gets converted into a passive, opponent is stunned for 2.666 seconds. Special 2, Dark Dimension Hex Pistols. Places a Hex debuff on the opponent, reducing ability accuracy by 75%. Hex debuff converts all current buffs on the opponent to permanent buffs with minus 100% ability accuracy. Alright, so he doesn't, like I said earlier, doesn't nullify buffs anymore. He just turns them into permanent buffs that don't do anything. They're just dead buffs, ready to be detonated. After the attack ends, trigger invisibility, and also inflict a degeneration debuff for, Special 3, the darkness takes over, inflicts a blade debuff, inflicts a stagger debuff, and also it restores all Dormammu demonic energy charges back up to 10. So, I said earlier how you start the fight with 10, this is how you get those 10 back. So, however you want to manage it, if you want to put 5 charges on the opponent and 5 on yourself, now you're at 0, use a special 3, now you're back up to 10. If you want to put 10 on the opponent and none on yourself, if you want to put 10 on yourself, the hood, and put none on the opponent, however you want to manage it, however you want to do it, use a special 3 to gain those 10 back. All damaging debuffs are paused during special attacks. So that's 6.66 seconds, that's paused during special attacks. Alright, signature ability. While invisible is on cooldown, chance to power steal 10% of your opponent's power on every single hit. Chance is 55% every hit around Sig level 60. Also while on cooldown, the hood is stun immune, and any attempted stuns are reflected and shot back at the opponent. Alright, that's my hood buff. What do you think? I don't think I took anything away. I just combined the buff and the hood right now. I think I could just combine them together and made them work and made them fit. I changed things, but they're still basically the same. Yeah, Hex doesn't nullify all buffs anymore and all incoming buffs, but it turns those buffs into dead buffs that don't do anything, right? So it doesn't nullify them, but it's basically the same thing. Just turns them into dead buffs because you want those buffs active so you can detonate them. So instead of doing Hex pistols and you detonate those, you detonate buffs now. So I tried to add both in there. I tried to add extra things, and you know, the spells you put on the hood enhances his abilities and gives him extra abilities, but the buffs that you put on the opponent, the curses, it decreases their abilities, right? So you have a way to increase the hood's abilities, and you have a way to decrease the opponent's abilities, right? So I think I did. This took me like a whole day to figure out all of these and doing the math and figuring out what can I detonate, you know, instead of, you know, if I'm gonna detonate buffs, I don't want the special 2 to nullify all the buffs. So what can I do instead? Instead, the special 2 turns all buffs into dead buffs. So it just took me a while to figure this all out. And I never claimed, I don't think I have the best ideas in the world. I'm not like, I don't do this for a living, alright? These are just my ideas that I came up with that I would think would be fun and cool. I would have fun playing this hood. It's basically the hood buff and the current hood put together. You know, I think it would be great. This would be my ideal hood, right? He still has everything he has at the moment, and you just add on top the hood buff. So, what do you think? Are these the shittiest ideas in the world? Tell me, what do you think? I think the sexiest man in Alaska. Come on, I think I came up with pretty good ideas. Let me know.